Hey everybody, so in this video I'm going to talk through a very simple two-step strategic framework for fast piano progress. And it basically comes down to step one, what are you doing? Step two, how are you doing it? To elaborate on it a little bit, step one, what specifically are you trying to do in your music? Can you indicate the start and end points of the section that you're trying to play correctly or trying to play well? Okay, that's it. Okay, cool. Step two, what's the strategy that we're going to use in order that you can play that little section well? And interestingly, it's almost always the same default strategy, but it's still easy for students to get confused. So I find that this very simple little framework, it still really helps clarity of thought and clarity of which strategy is supposed to be used. And I'm going to elaborate on all of this. So on this channel, I hope to share with you strategies, mindsets, methods, etc., often off my own creation, that I hope will help you in your piano playing, hopefully other areas of your life as well. So if you want to know all the details in terms of the logical methodology, you can search David Chang, 14 Layers of Strategy, David Chang, Logical Methodology. I do have playlists that are titled the same thing on the channel as well too. I'm probably still going to try to really quickly explain some of the basics here. So I would find that this, what are you trying to do and then how are you doing it? Somehow these two would become confused or it become muddled or just kind of nebulous in some way. And so even though I have concepts such as my rule of transition, rule of expansion, I'm going to explain these very briefly in this video, but you can search David Chang rule of transition, David Chang rule of expansion, watch some of those different strategies on the channel if you're curious about more details or more examples. I would find that kind of all these concepts would start seeping into each other in a way that really wasn't helpful. The integrity of the concepts would start to become compromised. And so that actually, honestly, students would still advance much faster than if they just practice almost anything's better than just mindlessly playing the same thing over and over again. But rather than harnessing the full power of this concept or the full power of this concept, it was kind of they ended up maybe canceling each other out to some extent. So instead of advancing 3 or 5 times faster, maybe the student's only advancing twice as fast or 1.7 times as fast, which isn't bad, but it could be better if we just refined the clarity of their strategy and decision making. And so I actually just wrote it out here. I actually wrote this in a little Google Doc. There definitely could be variations on this. It's just step one, what are you solving? And when I say solving, I mean, what are you trying to play correctly over the fairly short term, right? What are you solving? What are you trying to do to play to quality? So perfectly smoothly, notes, rhythm, hopefully the rhythm, notes, rhythm, the fingering is there and there's no stopping at all, no hesitations. It's nice and solid, even if there's no musicality yet. It's from memory, hopefully. Even just doing it correctly once would be great for starters. And then how are you solving it? So you just got to figure out what are you doing? What is the relatively short-term goal? And then how are you going about it? And I give some general rules of thumb. It should be a goal attainable maybe roughly within the next 5 to 7 minutes, especially if you're just starting out, especially if it's smaller areas that you're practicing. And I just say point at the start and end points. A lot of the time students are not able to do this. So if they're practicing a 1-measure set in my methodology, which is 1 measure plus the next beat, sometimes they're not pointing to the first beat or the first note of the next measure, or maybe they're not even in the correct measure. Or if I say practice this half-measure set, can you indicate the start and end points of half a measure and then the following note or the following chord? So just even though it seems simple, it's still quite important. And then how are you solving it? And it's basically just one of these. If you look at my 14 layers of strategy, I say adding in reverse is our default strategy for solving all sets. So really add in reverse is sort of broadly the answer to everything. But if it's a both hand set, and that's going to be the case a lot of the time, if you're more advanced, it might not even be necessary to just do, and I'll kind of elaborate on this more, but you might be starting with both hands sets from the start. So even though the goal within the next 5 to 7 minutes is a both hands set, we're going to use this strategy of add and reverse separate them both for each step. So it's not like you must stay within both hands. It's actually often advantageous to break it, separate them both. So it's true, while I'm talking through this, you can see that there is nuance to it, but it still comes down fundamentally to just pointing at the start and end points of what it is that you're doing, and then just adding in reverse separate them both for each step. or just add in reverse. So if there's not even, if you're doing a separate hand set, there isn't a both hands choice at all. If you're doing right hand alone, then you're going to have to only add in reverse. If you're doing a both hand set, this is going to be the default strategy, every single time. So I'm going to try to put this into practice in a moment here. And I think it's actually a really good idea for students to probably have something like this off to the side. Step 1, what are you solving? Or what are you trying to do in the next 5 to 7 minutes or so? Step 2, how are you solving it? And they could write those little subtitles. What are you solving? It should be something within the next 5 to 7 minutes. Point of the start and end points. And then how are you solving it? Add in reverse, separate them both for each step. That's probably the answer, as long as it's both hands. If there's no both hands, it's just add in reverse. Now, I even had videos come out recently in terms of strategy within strategy and nested requirements. I talked about global versus staggered spaced repetition strategy. Sure, there's more sophisticated strategies, but here I'm talking about keeping things relatively simple. Now, in my logical notation, I'm just going to go through real quick these concepts as they come up. For separate hands, they'll be within square brackets. So if we do a right hand one measure set, I'll just indicate on the screen. I think that'll be easier. So I'm going to use a copy of Canon in D here as I start to mark things. I think I'm going to have to just explain some of these concepts in brief. So for instance, if I'm practicing a one measure set, let me make this smaller. Maybe this is appropriate. I'm practicing from here to here. And let's say I did that just right hand alone. Well, I would mark in square brackets a 1 right over here. And that means I played right hand alone this entire measure plus the next beat. And then if I did left hand, an entire measure plus the next beat, again, it's without messing up. And usually the fingering would be written here. All the fingering, all the notes, everything is there. And then I did that pretty much perfectly, no hesitating, from memory. Even just one time, I would mark a 1 and then leave it. If you're curious in terms of why we're just leaving it, if you search David Chang spaced repetition, David Chang forgetting on purpose, basically the premise is that after we get it to quality from memory, even just one time, we will just leave them and we'll do a lot of whatever that is. And then we'll come back and then we will start to expand them into larger areas. That would be my rule of expansion. Then each time that we forget, we completely forget, and then we have to relearn the thing again. So it's not undesirable. It's totally fine. It's actually a healthy part of the learning process. We're purposely doing that and using that to our advantage. Every time we do that, our long-term memory is getting stronger and the learning is becoming deeper because we're having to use cognitive effort to retrieve the information. So anyway, let's say that we're just starting even with quarter measure separate hand sets. So I'm actually going to indicate here, and I'm going to try to do this within a relatively small frame. So, okay, so we've got these one measure set markers, one measure plus the next beat, one measure plus the next beat. And maybe I'll indicate, let's say, half measure set markers. So this would be half of a measure plus the next beat, half of a measure plus the next beat, etc. Okay, so I mark these. Okay, and then I'm just going to keep it within these two measures, otherwise this will end up being a 5-hour long video. So then we have these quarter measure set markers, which is in each case a quarter of a measure, just a quarter of a measure plus the next beat. So I'm marking these circles here. Of course, this might be a review for you if you've seen a lot of other videos on the channel, but so much repetition is necessary in order for the concepts to be really absorbed in most learning. So, because humans are so forgetful, of course. So let's say we were doing quarter measure sets. Now, if you recall, so it's the first step is just saying what are we doing here? What are we trying to do in the next 5 to 7 minutes? Let's say I'm a real total beginner. I'm only trying to play from here to here. Even that might be a challenge, right? Let's assume all the fingering is written. But believe it or not, I'll have even total beginners start trying to play something like this, or a beginner possibly, if I've taken them through other easier parts of the piece first. But it could just be within 1 or 2 months or something that we start doing this, or it could be right away depending on the person. So within this, the default strategy, what are we doing? We're doing circle to circle, this quarter of a measure set, quarter of a measure plus the next beat. The default strategy, so step 1, what are we doing? Circle to circle, just right hand. Step 2, how are we doing it? Adding in reverse. So if needed, I would add in reverse in the like really small. Like I might do like the last 2 notes, the last 3 notes, the last 4 notes, going forwards. Like even though I'm saying adding in reverse, it means playing this note, then that note. Then the blue means this note, then this note, then this note, right? The green means this note, then this note, then this note, then this note, etc. And then finally I can go back to the beginning. So all of that, adding single notes in reverse, it just results in me writing a quarter over here, okay? So that would be for the right hand. And it might not be necessary to add in reverse even. It could be that I just do this outright from there to there, which means it's probably too easy for me. But let's say that sometimes that might happen. Other times I might add smaller, or I might add other things in reverse. It might be that I add 8th measure sets in reverse. I do these 3 notes from here to here, and then I do the whole thing. But in any case, I use the adding in reverse strategy as necessary. And it's always like, step 1, what am I doing? Playing from green circle to green circle. How am I doing that? I'm adding in reverse in order to do it, as long as I can't do it right off the bat. So just for sake of time, let's pretend that I write quarter measure sets through, I guess I could probably just do it. It's probably not that, it doesn't take that long. So I'm just gonna write super messily. So I've got quarters here, okay. And then the same thing for the left. So if I'm doing left from here to here, I'm like, step 1, what am I doing? I'm playing from green circle to green circle with just the left. How am I doing it? I might be adding in reverse, last 2, last 3, last 4 and the whole thing, or I might skip some. But the result would be, and I would mark in square brackets, a quarter, but just vertically aligned below the left hand starting point. Okay, so now for sake of time, you can pretend that I'll have written all the left hand quarter measure sets, which every time I'm going from circle to circle, I'm adding in reverse in order to solve that. Now, for my rule of expansion, let's pretend that I covered a very wide area. When I come back here, I see 2 sets of the same size and complexity next to each other, 2 quarter measure right-hand sets or separate hand sets. I must try to combine them and double their size, even if I've completely forgotten them. For details on why, you can search David Chang rule of expansion, but just bear with me here. So now I am using the rule of expansion. I see the 2 quarters next to each other, and then actually, let's see. I'm gonna pull up the Google Doc again, just to be clear. So I'm doing like step 1, what are you solving? Step 2, how are you solving it? It still comes down to this. So I'm using the rule of expansion, but I am deciding, okay, see 2 quarters next to each other, I want to expand into a half measure set. That means from red triangle to red triangle. So what am I doing? I'm doing a half measure set, or I want to do it. Red triangle to red triangle, a realistic goal within the next 5 to 7 minutes or so. How am I doing it? Add in reverse. So I can decide what to add in reverse. I might add 8th measure sets in reverse, like the green, the last 8th, and then the last quarter. The fact that I've done this quarter already doesn't mean that I wouldn't do this. The last 3/8, and then the entire thing. So those 4 steps, even though I'd already done these quarter measure sets beforehand, I still identified the start and end points. And then I still added in reverse, green, blue, yellow, red. So my method was still adding in reverse, and then that resulted in me combining these 2 quarter measure sets into a half measure set. So, and that would be the same thing with these other areas too. So for sake of time, let's just pretend that I combined all of the other, this isn't working. I combined all the other quarter measure sets into half measure sets in both the right hand and in the left hand. So the left hand also did the same thing. We went through the same strategy. Okay, and I won't mark everything just for time. But okay, so let's say that we went through a lot of that. Now my rule of transition, if you want to go from separate hands to both hands, you can search David Chang rule of transition if you want more details. But basically it should be at least a 2-to-1 ratio. So if I did half measure separate hand sets, some time has passed, I've moved on, now I'm coming back. I should not try to do half measure both hand sets. That'll be probably too difficult if I'm a beginner, intermediate student, beginner student probably. I'm going to go for something only half as large, which would be quarter measure both hand sets. So again, I'm asking myself, like, step 1, what am I doing? And step 2, how am I doing it? So step 1, what am I doing? What would be a quarter measure set from green circle to green circle. Here's the start point. Here's the end point. How am I doing it? I'm going to add and reverse, separate them both for each step. So looking back at that document, what are you solving? Well, I'm trying to do quarter measure both hand sets using the rule of transition. So previously I'd done half measure separate hand sets. Now I'm trying to do quarter measure both hand sets, circle to circle. I pointed at the start and end points. How am I solving it? Well, I'm going to add and reverse, separate them both for each step because it's a both hands set. And in reality, the strategy is, again, pretty much always add and reverse, separate them both for each step. It's just that when we did the earlier examples, there wasn't even a both that you could do. And so that's why it was just adding in reverse. And if you're a more advanced student, sometimes you might not need to break it, separate them both for each step. But let's pretend that that's not the case and that, like many other students, the strategy is actually useful to you. So again, what am I doing? Green circle to green circle, here to here. The strategy is add and reverse, separate them both for each step. So I might add and reverse, I might start with this last eighth measure set. But instead of just doing both, I'll do right hand, left hand, and then both, as opposed to just doing both outright. So I'm breaking it separate, right, left, both, and then I'm doing the entire thing, right hand, left hand, and then both hands. And by the way, the reason I started using this framework again is because I think you can see, even though these are relatively simple concepts, once we start talking through them, yeah, it is easy to get a little bit confused. And so you really want to ask yourself, what am I doing? Green circle to green circle. I know I'm being very redundant, but purposely so, because we need that repetition so it really sinks in on at different levels in your consciousness, in your awareness, and so on. And then we're using the strategy, add and reverse, separate them both for each step. Not try it from the beginning over and over, not do right hand through the whole thing and then left hand through the whole thing, the green. You want to start with the blue first. Right, left, both, then the green, right, left, both. And all of that is so that you can then solve the, quarter measure set. So I guess we can actually erase these now, and then we would write in quarter. And this would be using curly brackets because that's how I indicate both hands sets in my methodology, quarter of a measure plus the next beat. It would be the same thing from here to here. So we have green circle to green circle, and we're going to add and reverse separate them both for each step in order to solve that. Right, left, both for the last eighth, and then right, left, both for the whole thing. And then I will then write a quarter here, etc. So let's pretend I wrote a lot of quarters. Just for sake of time, this is already almost a 20-minute long video as usual. So let's say I come back. Now my rule of expansion, I see 2 quarter measure both hand sets. And remember, some time has passed. It could be the next day, could be next week, could be a few hours from now. But I've done other things now. I've come back. The rule of expansion states that because I see 2 sets of the same size and complexity next to each other, I should try to expand them and combine them together. And what am I trying to do? I'm trying to do a half measure set from here to there, from red triangle to red triangle. How am I doing it? Same strategy as always. Add and reverse, separate them both for each step. Not separate through the whole thing, not do the first quarter first and then the second quarter next. Even if you'd completely forgotten it, we still identify the start and end points. It doesn't matter if you totally forgot the component quarter measure sets. Here's the start point, red triangle, end point, red triangle. We're going to add and reverse, separate them both for each step. We could add eighths of a measure in reverse, last eighth, right, left, both, last quarter, right, left, both, last 3/8, right, left, both, and then the entire thing, right, left, both. And that entire 12-step process, I mean, that's just the default strategy, but that entire strategy might be to then combine the quarter measure sets into a half measure set. So, I know that talking through this whole video, it probably seems like it is still pretty complex, and to some extent it is. That's the reason why searching David Chang, 14 Layers of Strategy, David Chang Logical Methodology, looking through other videos on the channel, that will definitely apply, or that will definitely provide a lot more additional nuance and detail. The 14 Layers of Strategy definitely goes slower through a bunch of these concepts. So it's not even important that you followed or mastered every single thing in the video. The important thing is that 2-step framework. Hopefully some examples that I gave did shed further light on how to think clearly, where you don't want to confuse, like, for instance, like sometimes I think we start to do like a half measure both hand set or quarter measure both hand set, and then the student will start adding in reverse from the end of the entire measure, or they'll say like, oh, I already did separate hands like a few days ago, so then I'm just going to stay within both hands now. Like they start to, like I was saying earlier in the video, they start to mess with the integrity of the concepts. So even though the default strategy is almost always add and reverse separate than both for each step, the student will accidentally confuse that. They will think, oh, but last week I already did separate hands, so that must mean I don't have to do separate hands now. Or they'll think, oh, I forgot like this first part of the measure, so I'm going to review it. Or I'm going to do separate hands first just to make sure that I know it. And before you know it, they're using some other strategy. Not that it's a bad strategy. I just think it's not as strong as this one. Why do I think this one's strongest? Because I've developed these methods since I was 16, 17 years old, and I've been teaching since I was 13, and I've tested it on myself and thousands of students. Not that this is the only way. I mean, if anything, quite the opposite. I'm continuously refining the methodologies, and the laboratory is my continued teaching and my continued practicing. Things are continuing to evolve now. But this framework has been really useful, even at a very rudimentary level. Just asking the student or just asking yourself, hold on a second here, the next 5, 7, maybe 10, 5 to 7 minutes preferably, what am I trying to accomplish? Here to here? Well, let's start adding in reverse separate than both for each step right away. Very hard for most people to do. Like, not only in terms of like, it's fine if it's hard for you to start from those areas. I still encourage students to do it because they'll get better and more aware at all those areas. I mean, even just getting yourself to do it. Students like, let me just try it a bunch of times. No need. Like, if you could really get it that quickly, it's too easy of a section for you to practice anyway. So when I'm practicing, I will purposely choose an area that is hard enough that I can't get it very quickly outright. So instead of trying it a bunch of times, I'm adding in reverse separate than both for each step, basically right from the start. Anyway, hope you found this interesting. Let me know your thoughts, questions, and please like, subscribe, let people know about the channel. Let me know if this is useful to you, and looking forward to the next video.